of the Ethiopian queen. We're dealing with people writing who know a lot more than we know. So Judas Iscariot is another one of these multiple Judases. Well, I don't want to get into too much of that, but you know, Judas has become basically the pejorative in Western civilization for traitor. And all the family of Jesus are considered to some extent by the Western view somewhat traitors, backsliders, to the Paul view. Now, you know that Paul in Galatians does treat his controversies with James, the brother of Jesus, and they're very severe, and he treats them in quite some detail. So I think that's a primary source. There's no overriding there. When you get down to these materials, where you get a primary source that you can rely on, that comes first. So the controversies of Paul and James are very extreme. You say, why could this have happened? Because the people in the West who followed the Pauline approach basically were antithetical to the people in the East who followed the Jamesian approach. And the documents we have come out of, to a certain extent, Greek quarters. They're written in Greek. They're written mostly from the point of view of those in the West, particularly after the fall of the temple. So it was very good. It was very easy to pejoricize people. But what you're basically doing is pejoricizing this Jewishy form of Christianity. I'm not advocating, I'm just stating a fact, this Nazarite form of Christianity, this wholly from the mother's womb. So in the Judas Iscariot episode, I think we have a characterization. I don't think there really ever was a Judas Iscariot. The election to succeed Judas as such, as a betrayer of Jesus, to me that's part of the polemics of the period. So we get the election of Matthias to succeed who? The 12th apostle, to flesh out the 12th apostle scheme. But Paul doesn't even really know anything about the 12 apostle scheme. There are apostles plural. James is one. Paul makes it clear in Galatians that James is an apostle. Of the other apostles, I saw only Cephas and James. He makes it clear that James is an apostle, and I'm sure that James was an apostle, if we can characterize exactly what apostles were, which I tried to do in this book. But instead of electing an inconsequential 12th apostle to flesh out a idealized scheme, I think what we really had there in the earliest history was the election of James to succeed his brother Jesus. And you can do that all the way across. We get, as I told you, the attack on Stephen, taking the place of Paul's attack on James. Go to the Pseudo-Clementines. What happened? Paul threw James down the steps of the temple, left him for dead, but didn't kill him. Then James's group fled to the Jericho area. Very precise detail. How did that get in the Pseudo-Clementines? I don't know. But these are things we have to worry about. And I don't have time today to worry about all of those. Let's go into Peter, and we'll finish up. Peter is portrayed in Acts as greeting the Roman centurion Cornelius. And they're learning that he can accept Gentiles. This is a totally different view than the Pseudo-Clementines of Peter. And if you know, this episode reflects to some degree Paul's arguments in Corinthians and Galatians. Particularly in 1 Corinthians, Paul is laboring James's instructions to oversee community and talking about food, things sacrificed to idols, and saying, for him, everything is permitted. But when these weak people, these people with weak consciences, these vegetarians, and by that he clearly means James and his group, come, well, for their conscience's sake, refrain from eating. But Paul says, ultimately, all things in the butcher shops, marketplaces are clean. In the same breath, he enunciates his understanding of communion with the body and blood of Christ Jesus. Well, again, that's so complicated. We'd go into this book in great detail on that subject. But the point is, Peter, in the episode with the Roman centurion, gets Paulinized. Instead of the Pseudo-Clementine Peter in tatters, Peter observing extreme dietary laws, Peter preaching James's abstain from food sacrificed to idols, the key point. By the way, you know, in Josephus' description of the Essenes, they abstain from food sacrificed to idols, and they're willing to go to their deaths on this point. So all these people are joined in our sources. So it gets really interesting, the conjunction of all our sources. Well, Peter says in that episode, a tablecloth comes down from heaven. Peter standing on a rooftop in Jaffa. A tablecloth comes down from heaven, and Peter says, the voice says, "Eat, Peter, eat." And Peter said, "No, Lord, I have never eaten any forbidden thing." I think that is the true Peter. And 3 times the voice cries out to them, and then, "What God has made clean, let no man set aside." And Peter learns that he should call no thing and no human profane. These are very noble thoughts, but I don't think they're the historical Jesus, or rather the historical Peter. They are the historical Paul. So these are where we have to look very, very carefully, and I give you a lot of other episodes. Finally, who was it who was responsible for James and the other brothers being cousins, or considered cousins in some of our religious traditions? Jerome, I said. Where did he get that? He got that from an episode in the Gospel of John, that Mary has a sister called Mary. Do you know that in the Gospel of John, Mary has a sister called Mary? Mary, sister of the mother of the Lord, and she's married to Clopas. You remember Clopas, again, I mentioned before, the father of Simeon Bar Cleopas, etc., the so-called uncle of Jesus. In Luke, Clopas is the first person to whom Jesus appears on the road to Emmaus with an unnamed other. All that is too complicated for us to deal with today, but it shows how complex our sources are and how much information really is here. Well, Mary has a sister called Mary. Jerome exploited that to say finally that these are the sons of Mary and Clopas. What I finally conclude in my book is that as the doctrine of the supernatural Christ gathered momentum in the 2nd century, brothers became cousins, fathers became uncles, mothers turned into their own sisters. And in fact, I believe Jesus turned into his own brother. The 4th brother is who in gospel lore? Joses. Joses, which except for the vowel, we don't know anything about Joses. We know a lot about Simon. We know a lot about James. We know a lot about Judas. We know a lot about these other characters. James, we can fill books with, as we can see. Joses is the one we don't know because, in fact, Jesus turned into his own brother. Well, I leave you there. There's a lot I didn't cover, but that's why we have the book there. I hope you'll find it interesting. Thanks a lot for hearing my remarks today.